Arthur's life was a peaceful, steady rhythm, a well-worn path through his garden and a cup of tea by the window. At 83, he was a creature of habit, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of tilling soil, his mind a vast library of memory. But a silent, creeping fog had begun to gather. It started with a forgotten name, a misplaced tool, a story he'd told his young neighbor Lena just yesterday. He tried to dismiss it as a small concession to age, but a growing dread whispered that this was something far more sinister, an unseen force slowly erasing the map of his mind. The symptoms deepened with a chilling regularity. He would walk into a room and stand there, frozen. The purpose of his journey vanished into a paralyzing blankness. Simple decisions, once as natural as breathing, now felt fraught with an unexplainable anxiety that left him with a throbbing ache. His thoughts, once a clear and flowing stream, now felt like a murky, stagnant pool. He knew, with a gut-deep certainty, that this wasn't the gentle decline of old age. A quiet poison was at work, but its source remained a terrifying, invisible secret. He began to search for a pattern, and the more he looked, the more the pieces clicked into a grim mosaic. The deepest moments of mental fog, the strange physical sluggishness, the overwhelming sense of dread, they all descended after his midday meal. It was a daily ritual he had performed his entire life, taking a plate of leftovers from the refrigerator and popping it into the microwave. It was the most sensible, harmless thing in the world, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this simple act was the very origin of his despair. Why would a quick, convenient meal be the source of a slow, creeping horror? He had spent his life believing that health was found in the ingredients. He grew, but the truth he was about to discover was buried in a far more unsettling place. The silent culprits weren't the food itself, but a dangerous chemical metamorphosis triggered by a single moment of heat. A hidden truth that threatened not just his mind, but his very existence. The suspicion that his midday meal was the culprit was a seed that had taken root in Arthur's mind. He decided to conduct his own quiet investigation, a silent experiment in his own kitchen. The first food he chose to scrutinize was the one he loved the most, spinach. He had always believed in its life-giving power, a rich green vegetable he harvested by the armful from his garden. His Sunday tradition was a massive spinach-laden lasagna, a dish he lovingly layered with rich sauces and tender, glossy leaves, meant to feed him for days. The leftovers were a treasure, a symbol of efficiency. For years, he had microwaved a slice of this lasagna for his lunch on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He began to track his symptoms with a new, meticulous eye. And there it was, a pattern so stark and clear it made his heart pound with a mix of fear and revelation. On the days he ate the reheated lasagna, the mental fog was at its thickest. Names of old friends would vanish from his memory, replaced by a frustrating, hollow blankness. The vague ache behind his eyes would deepen into a persistent, dull throb. The once comforting food now felt like a lead weight in his stomach, a source of profound unease he could no longer ignore. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Arthur turned to the community center's battered old medical journals. He spent hours, his finger tracing lines of dense text that spoke of things like nitrates. He learned that in their natural form, nitrates in spinach were harmless, even beneficial. But the journals warned of a dark transformation when spinach was cooked, stored, and then exposed to the intense heat of a microwave. The nitrates broke down into nitrites. This was a subtle but crucial step, a chemical change that led to the formation of something far more sinister, nitrosamines. The words on the page chilled him to the bone. The research, backed by clinical studies, linked these compounds not only to an increased risk of cancer, but also to something that explained his daily torment, neurological damage. The journals spoke of a silent war, a low-grade inflammation that nitrosamines could trigger in the body, a silent assault on the nervous system that could contribute to cognitive decline and even neurodegenerative diseases. His mind wasn't just aging, it was under attack. The simple act of reheating his beloved lasagna was the very weapon, turning a healthy food into a hidden threat. The moral of the story was no longer a mystery. He had to change. Spurred by his discovery about spinach, Arthur's scrutiny of his habits deepened. His next suspect was the humble potato, a cornerstone of his diet. He'd grown them for decades, each one a promise of earthy goodness. His Sunday ritual involved roasting a big pan of them with rosemary and garlic, their skins crisp and golden, their insides fluffy. The leftovers were a treasure, a quick and comforting side dish for a busy week. He'd dutifully wrap them in foil, and, come Tuesday evening, he'd pop a few into the microwave for a minute or two. He had long noticed a strange, physical consequence after eating his reheated potatoes. A deep, bone-weary sluggishness would settle over him, making the simplest task feel like a monumental effort. His stomach would feel tight and uncomfortably bloated. But the most terrifying symptom was the sudden, disorienting dizziness. He'd once been so overcome that he had to lean against a fence post in Lena's garden, waiting for the world to stop spinning. He dismissed it as a simple symptom of age, a body protesting its years. Now, he wondered if it was a symptom of something far more sinister. His research led him down a chilling new path. He read about something called Clostridium botulinum, the very bacterium that caused botulism. The articles explained that this microbe thrived in a specific environment, a low-oxygen, high-starch space. They described, with clinical precision, how cooked potatoes, especially when tightly wrapped in foil, and left to cool slowly at room temperature before storage, created the perfect breeding ground. The bacterium itself might be harmless, but it produced a neurotoxin that was completely odorless and tasteless, a perfect. Arthur felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. His habit of wrapping the potatoes in foil had created the very conditions for this toxin to flourish. The uneven heat of his microwave was not nearly enough to kill it. The sluggishness, the bloating, the dizzy spells, these weren't just the signs of an aging body. They were his body's quiet protest against a potent bacterial toxin. The simple act of reheating, born of a lifetime of thrift, had been a game of Russian roulette with his own health. He had faced an invisible enemy and, by a simple change of habit, had begun to win the war. The potatoes, it turned out, were not the enemy. His preparation of them was. With a newfound vigilance, Arthur's gaze fell upon his next suspect, the eggs. They were a cornerstone of his daily diet, a gift from his own small flock of hens. He saw them as a perfect source of protein, a little miracle in a shell. For convenience, he often hard-boiled a dozen on Monday mornings to have on hand for quick snacks. Sometimes, weary of eating them cold, he would pop one into the microwave for a minute, a simple act he thought was perfectly harmless. But he had noticed a strange and unsettling series of symptoms. The reheated egg would have a rubbery, unpleasant texture, and a faint, sulfurous smell would linger in the air. More concerning, however, was the feeling that would follow. A sour taste would settle in his mouth, accompanied by a vague queasiness and a dull, persistent headache. Most troubling of all was the noticeable dip in his mental clarity. He would try to remember something he had just read, but the words would feel slippery and elusive, his thoughts dull and frustratingly slow. His research led him to a chilling truth about the very chemistry of food. He learned that eggs contained cholesterol, a fat that was healthy in its natural state. But when cooked and then reheated, especially with the uneven and intense heat of a microwave, the cholesterol in the yolk would oxidize. This process created compounds called oxysterols, which had been directly linked to increased inflammation in the body. The articles warned that this kind of chronic, low-grade inflammation was not just a risk for heart disease, but a significant contributor to cognitive decline and neurodegenerative conditions like dementia. The rubbery texture and sulfurous smell weren't just a sign of poor reheating. They were an alarm bell, a clear warning that the egg's very structure had been compromised. Arthur realized with a jolt of fear that his habit was not making him healthier. It was slowly, quietly, adding fuel to a fire of inflammation within his own system. He had been eating this, thinking it was a healthy choice, all the while it was actively undermining his mental sharpness. The moral of the story was stark. Even the most nutritious foods could become a source of harm if they weren't handled with care and respect. From that day on, he vowed to eat his eggs cold, a small, conscious change that felt like a powerful act of reclaiming his health. With each new discovery, Arthur's kitchen became less of a sanctuary and more of a laboratory, a place where he was uncovering hidden truths about his health. His next experiment was with a food he considered a cornerstone of a good diet: chicken. He loved a good roasted chicken, a lean and versatile protein that was a go-to choice for a healthy meal. He'd roast a whole one on Sundays, and the leftovers would serve as quick lunches for the week. The habit was simple: slice the cold meat, put it on a plate, and warm it in the microwave. He had noticed a telltale pattern with this meal, too. After eating the reheated chicken, he would experience a strange, heavy sensation in his stomach, as if the food was simply sitting there, undigested. A deep, bone-weary sluggishness would follow, and his mind, which had felt clearer in recent days, would become cloudy and indistinct. He also noted that the chicken itself had a tough, slightly rubbery texture, a noticeable and unpleasant difference from its tender, juicy state on Sunday. His research led him to a concept that was both simple and deeply unsettling. He learned that when chicken is cooked, its protein structure changes to make it digestible. But when you reheat it, especially with the high, uneven heat of a microwave, those proteins undergo a second, damaging transformation. They become tougher, more rigid, and less available for the body to process. This explained the heavy feeling in his stomach. His aging digestive system was struggling to break down the altered proteins. But that wasn't the most alarming part. He read about the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. The articles explained that these compounds form when proteins and fats are exposed to high heat multiple times. AGEs, they warned, were not just a minor concern. They were a significant driver of low-grade systemic inflammation, a silent fire that gnawed away at the body. This inflammation, in turn, was directly linked to a cascade of chronic diseases, including neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia. Arthur's cloudy mind and general malaise weren't just signs of an aging body. They were symptoms of this internal, silent war. The rubbery chicken wasn't just a sign of poor taste, but a physical manifestation of this chemical damage. He realized his healthy choice was, in fact, silently undermining his vitality. From then on, Arthur decided that leftover chicken was best eaten cold, as a quick addition to a salad, or not at all. His final lesson came from a food he adored: mushrooms. They were a personal favorite, beloved for their earthy flavor and satisfying texture. Arthur knew they were packed with antioxidants and immune-boosting compounds, and he often made a large, comforting mushroom. The leftovers, he believed, were even better the next day, and he would warm a bowl in the microwave, the savory aroma filling his kitchen. But like the other foods, the reheating seemed to extract a cost he couldn't see. After these meals, he would notice a strange, slightly sickly sweetness in his mouth. The mushrooms themselves would lose their plump, tender quality, becoming chewy and watery. He'd also feel a new kind of mental fuzziness, a pervasive sense of being off-kilter. It wasn't the sharp, painful fog of his earlier symptoms, but a dull, disquieting feeling that made him feel disconnected from his own. He'd once been so out of sorts after eating his reheated risotto that he forgot to turn off the sink faucet, nearly flooding his kitchen. His research led him to the unique, delicate composition of mushrooms. Unlike other vegetables, they contained a complex blend of proteins and fragile enzymes. He learned that when you reheat them, particularly with the high, uneven heat of a microwave, their structure undergoes the proteins and delicate fats within them oxidize, a process akin to rust forming on metal. This chemical change was a key driver of oxidative stress in the body, a silent, corrosive force that leads to cellular damage. And the articles explained that this internal rusting placed a significant burden on the body's natural antioxidant defenses. Oxidative stress was a known contributor to chronic disease, but more importantly for Arthur, it was linked directly to a decline in cognitive function. The strange sweetness he tasted and the rubbery texture weren't just a sign of a ruined meal. They were the physical manifestation of this dangerous process. He had been taking a food meant to heal and nourish, and, through a simple act of convenience, had turned it into a source of silent harm. He realized this last piece of the puzzle was the final strain on his system. From then on, Arthur vowed to only eat mushrooms fresh, or to enjoy his risotto cold. A small act that felt like a powerful victory over the unseen forces that had been a silent threat in his own home. With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Arthur's world began to transform. He had spent his life thinking of health as a simple equation: good food in, good health out. But he had learned, through a slow and terrifying journey of self-discovery, that the simple act of reheating could turn a friend into a He had seen the silent poison in his spinach, the invisible toxin in his potatoes, the inflammatory betrayal in his eggs, the protein damage in his chicken, and the cellular rust in his mushrooms. His kitchen, once a place of comforting routine, had become a testament to the hidden dangers that lurked in plain sight. The change in his habits was immediate and profound. He no longer microwaved his food. Leftovers were now a cold pleasure: spinach lasagna in a salad, sliced chicken on a sandwich, potatoes tossed with herbs, and he began to cook smaller batches, embracing the fresh vitality of each meal. The cost in time was negligible, but the return on his health was immeasurable. Within weeks, the crippling symptoms that had shadowed him for months began to recede, little by little, like a fog lifting. The dull, throbbing ache behind his eyes vanished. The paralyzing moments of blankness in his parlor became a thing of the past. The terrifying dizzy spells and the bone-weary sluggishness disappeared, replaced by a new, surprising well of energy. His mind, once a murky pond, now felt like a clear, flowing stream. He could remember the names of his friends, the words to old songs, and the exact placement of every tool in his shed. He could talk to Lena without the fear of repeating himself, and his laughter felt lighter, more genuine. Arthur had not just learned to avoid 5 foods. He had learned a far more powerful truth. His health was not a passive state, but an active, conscious choice. The symptoms he had dismissed as the inevitable companions of old age were, in fact, a series of warnings from a body under silent attack. By listening, by investigating, and by making small, simple changes, he had reclaimed his vitality. The moral of his story was a living, breathing testament to a powerful lesson. Pay attention not just to what you eat, but to how you. For in the smallest of habits, a hidden enemy can reside, and in the simplest of changes, a life can be reclaimed. Thanks for watching. Hit the bell icon for the daily updates. Please do like, subscribe, and share with your friends.